And I am here with JT Woodruff of Hawthorne Heights. You guys have just announced your Lonely World Tour to celebrate the 20th anniversary of your album, If Only You Were Lonely. Why is now, well, obviously because it's the 20th anniversary, but why is this album so important for you to celebrate?
Um, I think that Hawthorne Heights has always been like a fan first band. Like that's just who we are. We're from the Midwest. We very rarely do things for ourselves, probably to a fault. So our compromise this time around is, 20 years is special. If you can last 20 years doing anything in the world, no matter your job, it's going to come with some sort of emotional attachment to it. So, this time around, we thought, let's play the album in full, give the fans what they want, what they're asking for. And then we'll also do like a career spanning set directly after it that will give us maybe what we want, some things that we haven't got to play in a long time, or some things that we never got to, because 20 years is a crazy amount of time as a songwriter. You know what I mean? Like, we wrote the Silence in Black and White when we were kids. That's not the best we would ever do, I promise you. No matter what fans think, and it's the first thing they ever heard, and we love it and we'll play it until we're gone. But we also have to try and work a little bit of new material in there, and then a little bit of stuff that we thought maybe never had a chance. Now that we're in kind of the digital era, anything has a chance. Anybody can get on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever and be like, you know what, I'm going to check some more of these songs out. So we just think it's proper to do that as well. Your fans have been kind of hearing you do, I guess, the same thing over and over to a degree, whether you're playing a festival set or supporting some other band. You get a tight 30, maybe a tight 40. This is the time where we get to make all the rules and everything. And we're just trying to, expose our hardcore fans to songs that we haven't played in a long time. And then also the casual listener who maybe wants Ohio is for Lovers, Saying Sorry, things like that. They're always going to get that too. So 20 years in, we're just kind of culminating the entire thing.
I think that's a great gift to fans and also to yourself. And 20 years, you're right. 20 years is a long time to be doing any one thing and having that longevity. And that's amazing. Thinking back to then, what was influencing your songwriting at the time?
That's a great question. Like, our band started in 2003, and there wasn't really a lot of this stuff happening yet. Like, now we can look back and, you have the world of the internet, and you can be like, what was happening in 2003? And, some sort of AI will give you that answer. We didn't have any of those tools or anything like that. So, our first record, The Silence in Black and White, like, we were just writing things that we thought were cool at the time. We had a lot of different influences. And that album probably sounds like that when you break it down. There's heavy stuff, there's soft stuff, there's poppy stuff, there's fast stuff, slow stuff. If Only You Were Lonely, we were learning to hone that in, so it didn't sound so manic. So like all over the place, so up and down, roller coastery, which was kind of, us as people. At the same time, we're coming into adulthood. There are no rules, so we need to make some rules for ourselves. And your first album is always a tough one to capture. Your second album is really when you got to figure out, can you do this or not? Are you built for this? Is this something that, like, you can, I guess, train your brain to think in a linear fashion? And this is the time that we actually felt like we were becoming a band. We have always been a band that listens to a lot of different things. We're music consumers, music fans. We listen to heavy bands. We're listening to stuff like Poison the Well at that time period. The opposite of December. It was like a massive record for us, and we sound nothing like that. But that's heavy music creeping in. And then we also listen to stuff like The Cure and The Replacements and The Smiths, stuff that doesn't sound anything like what we're doing. But, we grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. So like it's always been there for us. And you know, then you have this stuff that we listened to during our childhood, which is really just like Green Day and Nirvana, like all the big bands, Weezer, stuff like that. Um, so you have all of that stuff coming together, and then us trying to figure out how we do that and live in the independent music scene at the same time. You know, like we're hearing Taking Back Sunday, we're hearing Thursday, The Used, all of this stuff that is all kind of what we do, but in an entirely different universe at the same time. So like we've always thought of ourselves having as much in common with those type of bands and the Smashing Pumpkins. You know, and that's kind of where I feel If Only You Were Lonely lies. It lies somewhere in Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and then also with Story of the Year and The Used, and with you know, TBS and Thursday and all these other bands. Because we're happen to like listen to this stuff in real time, just like fans are. You know what I mean? Like we heard The Used for the first time in, you know, whatever year that came out, 2002 maybe. Just blows your mind. You know, you grow up listening to Blink 182 and then you hear The Used and like your world changes. And you know, we're a weird band at that time period. We have 3 guitar players and we're all writing the songs together. So it's very weird. Like now you see like one songwriter on there, and maybe bands are going in with a different guy that's not even in the band helping them, you know, craft songs and stuff. We're just 5 scatterbrained dudes trying to throw every influence that we can. And this is how it comes out in Hawthorne Heights. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just our process and how it is. But yeah, a lot of dark stuff, a lot of happy stuff. And that's kind of like, I think, why our band straddles the line a lot of times. You know, it's we always joke that like back then we sounded really heavy because there wasn't a lot of screaming yet. You know what I mean? And then like you flash forward now and it's like, are we the Disney emo band? Are we the ones who didn't scream quite enough? But back then, you know, like the cheerleader would hear us for the first time when we were almost like hardcore with training wheels. It was like, whoa, that has screaming. I've never heard that before. And you know, you flash forward and like it's very common now, which is a great thing. But back then it was like there wasn't a whole lot of us, and the internet wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So you didn't really have the discovery that we have now. You know, like we didn't hear of Census Fail until Census Fail started to get some heat. You know, we didn't hear of bands like that. We didn't hear of Silverstein until 6 months before we toured with them. You know, like it was just a totally different world. Now I would love to have that information, but it did kind of make it really pure, because you really weren't trying to sound like anything. You were just trying to sing and scream and be chaotic. You know, just young people creating young music. That's all we were.
I feel like you've listed pretty much everything I've ever listened to, but it does make sense kind of where you fall in that, I'll call it an emo spectrum.
Yeah, it's definitely yeah, it really is. That's a great way to look at it. It really is an entire spectrum, you know, like especially when it became a marketing term. You know what I mean? Like there was a time period in 2003, 2004, you did not say that word and we were happy to accept it. We're like, yeah, we love early Jimmy World and the Promise Ring and like all of that stuff we listened to. And it was a big influence on us, but we didn't think we would sound like that, or the Get Up Kids, you know, like all these bands, because these were bands that we thought were yearning for something. We heard the sadness in it, and it is about being from the Midwest. It's literally about from being like, there's no coasts anywhere near us. There's no water. There's no trees. There's like there's literally nothing. It looks like the Dust Bowl with cornfields. You know, like what's special about that? Nothing. That's why the people are special.
That's so funny, because I talked with Matt Pryor last week and he's like, he had very similar things to say. about Kansas. And I was like, all right, I live in Maryland, so it's definitely a different perspective. But I do think that there's something about that sort of very pure, sort of just genuineness that comes across when I listen to a Hawthorne Heights song and many others of that same spectrum.
Yeah, I think it really is the yearning for escapism. Like if you don't think of what Los Angeles looks like in your head, you'll feel like you're trapped forever. Or, the bright lights of New York City, anything like that. Like, even in Maryland, you can identify with crabs. You got a lot. You have a lot of cool stuff there. You have the coastline if you're on one side, and then you're the conduit to the East Coast. You're right up the road from Philly and wonderful places. We are right in the middle of it, right in the middle of small town America. And it's funny because when you watch all the movies and stuff that we grew up watching, they're all trying to imitate where we live. Like Hollywood is looking like Ohio. It's like looking like small town Ohio, whether you're watching the movie Halloween, which is supposed to take place in the Midwest, but it's filmed in Pasadena. Like they're trying to look like this, and we're trying to get out to the damn coast. So that's where that yearning hopefulness comes from.
I love that, the irony of that duality of like wanting that, they want this, we want that, and we're all just trying to move in different directions.
Yeah.
How much pressure were you feeling at the time to follow up the Silence in Black and White, and how much of that pressure was internal and external?
I think there was a lot of pressure because when we wrote the Silence in Black and White, nobody knew who we were. We were just happy to be signed to a record label. We were happy to have our first tour and then just continue to keep doing that. We were seeing the world for the first time. We were starting to maybe do it too much because everybody was asking us to go out on the road with them. We just kept consistently getting bigger and landing better offers. And then it culminated with Warped Tour 2005. And, when we were booked on the tour, we were just another band. But by the time we reached Columbus, Ohio on the first day, we were a massive band. And we didn't really know what the hell we were doing. We're like going up there in basketball shorts playing to 25,000 people. We're like, oh, man, we better get this shit under control because, we're just like regular dudes. And then we had to realize, oh, we might need to be more than that. You got My Chemical Romance coming up, wearing the bulletproof vests and stuff. And then you got Hawthorne Heights wearing like regular people things. And it was like, I don't know if we're doing this the right way. We need to sit down and have a talk about this. So at the end of that tour, at the end of Warped Tour, we were burnout in a wonderful way because we were living our wildest dreams. Our band just kept getting bigger and bigger. And we were getting pressure from the label, not bad pressure, more like, hey, this is going better than any of us thought. We need you back in the studio so we can follow this up quickly. So that way, and the entire music scene had broken as well. You know what I mean? It wasn't just Hawthorne Heights. It's like all this stuff is on MTV now. So you have to this is like a moment in music history. It was like the grunge scene, kind of like out of nowhere. Oh my gosh, all of these bands sound like this. So it was about keeping up with the world at the same time, not just keeping up with Hawthorne Heights. So the pressure really was time. Like, we didn't have any time to really stop and smell the roses and enjoy what was happening. And the funny thing is most of us are stone cold sober. So we're raw dogging life. You know what I mean? None of this, we have nothing to help ease the pain or panic or anything like that. It was we're just living in it. And sometimes it gets too much and sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you feel out of place, but you're on the road and you're in a van. Eventually you're in a tour bus and you're just trying to get it done. So our compromise to doing that, and my wedding was a couple of weeks after Warped Tour. So I'm getting married for the first time, and then I'm going right into the studio to record If Only You Were Lonely. So there is no time. And the pressure is all on us from the label and from ourselves, but it's all good pressure. There was never anything negative happening, really. Um, you know, labels are weird, bands are weird. It's just how it is. You know, you're balancing the art and the budget at the same time. Um, but yeah, we had no idea what we were doing, and we were all in panic mode, but we were all in manic mode at the same time. So we're like, how are we gonna follow up an album that we didn't know what we were doing then? We better figure out what the hell we're doing now. So we sat down and we kind of etched it out and discussed it. And we were like, okay, I'm getting married. Let's do pre-production in Ohio. Let's do it around our hometown. Let's bring the producer in. So that way, like, I can also have a little bit of life while writing and doing all that stuff. So we track pre-production, like little demos. We set up a makeshift studio in our bass player, Matt, his hometown of Trenton, Ohio, where it's literally just a little tiny main street and a pizza shop. And that's exactly how we wanted it. It was isolation, perfect small town Ohio. We were directly above a music store, running a little tiny makeshift studio. And then for lunch, we would go over to the pizza shop, then we would go right back to work. We forced our producer at the time, his name is David Bendeth, we forced him to come to Ohio and do this process with us. And he's a New York City guy. So, you know, he's used to that world. And we're like, nope, you're in our world, man. You're making an emo album. We didn't really say Midwest emo back then, and now it means something different. It means like jangly, crazy guitars and like stuff like that. We were making a Midwest emo album indirectly at that time period. So we get this New York City guy here, and we're like, hey, only place to eat's this pizza shop. So we're trying to get this guy who's used to New York City pizza to come and eat Midwest pizza, which is crazy to think about now. And the funny thing is, there was one hotel that he said was sufficient for him, and it was a Crown Plaza in downtown Dayton, Ohio, which you do not want to stay at. But it's the only one. He was like, that's the fancy one. That's where I'm staying. We were like, yeah, we'll pay for it, but that place is terrible. So we did that for about 6 weeks. And then we head over to Hoboken, New Jersey. That's my honeymoon. I'm literally in Hoboken, New Jersey, instead of going on a honeymoon and recording If Only You Were Lonely. And it was a bit of magic and a bit of a nightmare and a bit of chaos. And that's exactly what you want when you're making a record. We're directly across the river from New York City. At this point, we're still terrified of New York. You know what I mean? Like now I would be like, okay, well, we'll track till 5 o'clock. I'm going into the city. I'm going to go eat over there and then I'll come right back. Back then, no way. New York City is terrifying. I don't know if I belong there. I don't know what's happening over there. All I know is Irving Plaza is there and then I leave. You know, so there was a little bit of like chaos happening because we felt really isolated, but we were in one of the biggest hubs in America. And so, you know, we stayed in an apartment at the studio. So we didn't do anything other than craft this record. And we're working on it day and night. The studio staff leaves, we're still writing, we're working on guitars, piano, like whatever. And, you know, it kind of came up with some magical moments within the studio. You know, like I wrote the song Decembers at that studio, sitting there plucking the piano, which I do not know how to play, about my wife walking down the aisle and me leaving immediately for Hoboken, New Jersey. So there is a little bit of magic in the sadness and in the madness that we were going through. And despite all that chaos, it was a very wonderful experience that I can look back on now. But in the moment, you're just squeezed so tight. You have no idea what you're doing, and you're just hoping that this is what the fans want and what you want. But I think it turned out okay. In the moment, I think that it was like, I don't know what we're doing, man, but I hope that we're doing it right. And we tracked down to the last possible minute that we could. We had a car service pick us up to drive us to the airport in New Jersey, and we made our flight by 5 minutes.
My gosh.
That was the chaos that we were living in. And it was like, I always found myself going, I don't know when bands do drugs.
There's
I don't
no
have,
time.
yes, I don't have a minute. I do not have a minute to like do anything, like you're barely eating, like we live right across the street from a grocery store. So we're just going over there, getting our meals, bringing them up and going right back into the studio. And, I think that the album itself, when I listen to it now, I don't think that I thought this at the time. I think that we wanted to try to sound a little bit heavier in between our first record and the second record. But I feel like there is a stark contrast between the two because of that isolation and loneliness that we felt, and the being on the road so much, but also being away from our friends and family at a time that they probably needed us, which always feels selfish, because when you're not like, I guess, masking those signs by drinking every night and doing stuff like that, like you really sit there and you think about it at the end of the night when you try to lay down and put your head on your pillow, your eyes don't shut sometimes, and that's what you're thinking of. You're thinking of the people that you love that are back home. And sadly, that's how great art is made. Like, we are a lonely band. That is what we sound like. When we're gone, we care. When we're home, we do this full time as much as we can. So it was a wild ride though. And I look back in such reverence. At the time, I was probably super pissed off and super like, jittery, every emotion coming out of me all at the same time. But, I guess that's what, like, when they call it Elder Emo, it actually just means that you can breathe and that you have levity in the situation, and you can look back on mistakes that you made and just be like, you know what? We're still here. The mistakes couldn't have been that bad. But in the moment, it feels like everything's the end of the world.
I like that sentiment. Do you think that the album was in any way muted by the release and what happened with Victory Records?
Yeah, I do. I think that at the time period, like, you really didn't know what you were doing, and I feel like we did get kind of led down a few roads that maybe we shouldn't have got led down, in like the boring legal aspect of everything. You know what I mean? Like, that's just I think some of us wanted everything to remain status quo just because everything's working, and you're living your wildest dreams, playing the best shows of your life. We hadn't really experienced a down moment or anything like that yet, and it kind of felt a little bit like, when you look back, you're creating your down moment. It's kind of manufactured, but right is right. And we stood up for ourselves, and we felt like there was a couple things that weren't really getting, I guess, met how it was agreed upon. And so you just it's like two rams bumping into each other, trying to win a battle that should never have been fought. And that's what you can look back at and say. You can look back and say, you know what? I think maybe both parties were wrong. And we could have worked out everything a little bit better if everybody was a little bit chiller and cooler. And, but, problems don't work out like that, but I don't think anybody dwells. I don't think you can. I don't think that you can I don't think you should look at the bad spots in your life as the worst spots in your life. I think that if you do that, it'll drive you crazy. So at the moment, you know, everything felt so extreme. But now you look back and it's like, that was a bump in the road. Um, but, you know, is it one of the reasons why everything was working and firing on all cylinders and then felt like it didn't come to a screeching halt, but, you know, was, I guess, squeezed a little tighter than it should instead of being wide open and the entire, you know, campaign was running on full cylinders? Yeah, probably. But, you know, you can't go back and change history, but you can not make mistakes like that in the future, and we never have. And we never look back, and we don't feel, I guess, we don't feel any. I think a lot of people would feel bad about that time period in their life, and you know that's when artists get in their own heads and they're like, "We're not playing those songs." They just, you know, they make us think about that. We don't think about that at all. We think about the fans. We think about how um, they don't care about anything other than you entertaining them and showing them a good time, and hopefully they can relate to what you're doing. And I think that that is one thing that Hawthorne Heights tries to achieve, and we get it right. We don't get lawsuits right, and why we should file them. We get the fans, and I think that that is one of the things that drives us. You know, we never started this band to like dig through paperwork. We started this band to feel better. So, you know, we're not accountants. We're an emo band. We should focus on that. So I think that after that moment, after everything got resolved, that is what we've focused on, and we've never looked back. And I think that that is kind of my favorite part of our career, is that we never gave up. It is a triumph. It's always going to be a triumph, because things like that are what sink people, and they're what put an anchor on people for the rest of their lives. You know, whether you drop the ball during the big game, or, you know, I guess messed up in a boardroom or something like that somewhere, like you got to keep going. I think Hawthorne Heights has always kept going, and that's the thing that I'm most proud of.
Absolutely. And then moving forward, how would you say Hawthorne Heights sound has evolved since If Only You Were Lonely?
Yeah, I think that one thing that we're always cognizant of is trying to sound like ourselves, because in 20 years, that's so many time. That's so much time in music in general. That's just, you know, if you look back and think about, you know, the Beatles coming out in like, you know, the 60s, it would have been the 40s for them that they would have looked back on. Like, that's pretty crazy to think that, like, if you look back then to where we are now. Um, I think that we've always tried to stick to a couple of core values. Me, like, I always try to write about problems I've had in my life, or problems that people that I'm very close to have had. And, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of like poetry and alliteration and exaggeration, and those are just devices to make the problem seem worse than it is sometimes. Or sometimes I don't make it seem as bad as it is, and it feels very casual. And, you know, like, you know, maybe my wife will be like, I don't remember that happening that way. That feels crazy. And you know, so it'll cause a little bit of tongue in cheek arguments when I explain what I'm singing about, and she just laughs it off. But so I think Hawthorne Heights, I think that we try to relate to what other people are going through as much as what we're going through. So I think that level has always been there, no matter sonically what we've sounded like. I think it's what keeps us grounded in who we are. I think one thing that we've done rather well to a fault is we never really tried to switch things. So, you know, when everybody was getting a little bit freaky with the keyboards, and like things were starting to get a little bit neon, we stayed like in that dark plateau intentionally, or when, people started breaking out banjos and like dressing like their boxcar folk and stuff like that. Like, we never went there. We always try to maintain like who we are. When this wasn't particularly cool, we still thought it was cool. I think that that's a good trait. I think remaining true to what you're trying to do is better than trying to chase something that somebody else showed you. And every music scene has its peaks and valleys. It's just going to happen. But bands that stay true to themselves usually stay afloat, at least. So I think that like you're always going to get rock guitars one way or another. You're not going to get like guitar solos and stuff like that. That's not who we are. But you're going to get rock guitars. You're always going to get, it's always going to sound like 4 or 5 guys up there. I think that that's kind of who we are. And, we filter out a few members here and there, just like any band does after 20 years worth of playing. And it's almost always been on good terms, meaning like people don't want to be on the road as much anymore, or people, want to spend time with their families or tackle another interest in their life. We've maintained close with all those other guys, close relationships. So even when we filter out different members, it doesn't really change the ethos of who Hawthorne Heights is and how we sound, because those people are crucial. They're not just faces in the halls. You know what I mean? It's not like you graduate high school and everybody just turns into a blur. These are real people that we love. We're just very confident in what we sound like. Like we always know that we want to have a riff, but we're not a metal band. We know that we want to sing about relatable things, and we cannot be casual like a pop band. Stuff like that, which is sometimes to a fault. We sound serious. You know what I mean? Like, I always joke, I'm totally incapable of writing about happy things. Like, I don't know why. Somebody could tell me to write about something and I would find the darkest side of it, even if I'm not thinking that. You would think I would be very negative because of how this sounds. My wife, the real life Nikki FM, is always telling me, she's like, your fans have got to hate me personally, because all this stuff that you come out with, and it always sounds so dark, but they don't realize that we've been married this entire time. And we've been together since 2001 or something like that. And like, you would think that would lead to triumphant lyrics. It leads to dark times. I don't know how. I'm not living every dark moment in my life, but when you have the kind of attitude that like things get stuck in your head and you feel like everything should be like perfect, that's what you write about. You write about the mistakes, and you write about the isolation, and write about things like that. So, I think we've always tried to remain that type of band. Play some guitars. Maybe we'll have some drums in there. I'll probably sing about something. Like if you remain who you are, you're always going to be rock solid. I feel like even if a song didn't turn out how I wanted it to turn out, we never chase something that we're not, and that's not the reason. It's always usually like, I think I could have done better, or maybe if we had more time, that song could have been better, or something like that. But it's never been like, dude, why did we become the synth band for record 4? We never did any wild stuff like that. And for better or for worse, we might have been able to have our whatever, our Mumford moment or something like that, but we never really had it.
I'm trying to picture a happy, joyful, upbeat Hawthorne Heights song, and it just my head hurts. It just doesn't work, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yep.
Are there plans to follow up the Rain Just Follows Me EP?
Yeah, we have been working pretty nonstop, working on songs consistently. And we have a whole lot of them at this point. And now we're like kind of plotting our move because, for better or for worse, when you've been a band for 20 years and you have two albums that people really like, you could coast if you wanted to. And oftentimes people do, and you don't realize you're doing it because you're always out on the road and stuff like that. And, so we've been working on it steadily, and now we're just kind of plotting our next year because, we're doing If Only You Were Lonely for all of 2026. And that's going to lead to some great times, and also some times where you feel, why are we not releasing these other songs that we already have? And we're going to do a better job. That's one of our like real main missions, is promoting the past while experiencing the present at the same time, because I do think that that is what we all need to be as human beings, because it can't, like, you can't always look in the past for better or for worse. Like, there is an amount of nostalgia that is too much, and we have to give you what you're going through right now. So that's kind of what we're focusing on, and we're literally tracking music right now. We will be tracking music up until we leave for the Chiodos tour, which is Thursday. So I'm cutting vocals every single day, and the fans definitely are going to have a lot to look forward to. It's just, how and when do we release this stuff, and how do we release it? The music world's weird. People, like, you, if you're cognizant of like just reading stuff on the internet, it's like some people are like, dude, they released 6 singles and I only got like 3 more songs for the album. And then other people are like, dude, why would you release an album? I can't pay attention to all that. So it's like, we don't know what we're supposed to do. We're writing the songs to do it, though. So we got a lot of them, and we're super excited about them. There are no musical departures. We have remained Hawthorne Heights, no matter what that is. So I'm really excited about it, though, and we have been hard at work, and we have a mobile rig that we bring on our tour bus that we're going to be finishing stuff up with. So we'll definitely get as many new songs as we can out next year.